S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church. Glad that you are with us as we finish this series. We've had a 4-week series.
Yeah, kind of a shorter series.
In a couple of the Old Testament books.
Three Old Testament books.
Yeah,
right?
we did Joel, and then we're going to finish up Hosea
today.
And tag Obadiah.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. So the big question is, why are we doing all these together? And I know we talked through it before. We've been in Kings, we've been in Chronicles. We were in Chronicles for a really long time, and every week in Chronicles it was there's a downward spiral. Things are going to get worse. But these three prophets are all in that time period, so it makes sense to kind of hit them all at the same time.
Yeah, as best as we can tell.
Yeah.
Hosea we know because Hosea is dated specifically.
Yeah.
Joel's not dated. Obadiah is not only not dated, we don't know anything about him at all.
Right, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So then it's we'll get there, but it's like, why is he even in there? Yeah. What are we doing there?
Yeah. So there are 5 days in this reading. So 4 chapters left in Hosea, just 1 chapter a day, and then Obadiah is only
1 chapter.
21
verses.
Yeah,
20,
I think. Yeah. So that'll be.
So you'll be able to knock that out pretty easily.
Yeah, pretty easily. So well, let's finish up Hosea, and we know, just recapping quickly, we know that what most people know about Hosea is he was supposed to marry a prostitute or something like that, and have some kids, and then buy her back, right?
Yeah.
And
he's supposed to feel what God felt.
Yeah,
when
the
Israel, nation of Israel, and being betrayed.
Yeah.
As a partner.
Right. And that's basically the whole book of Hosea, right? Well, maybe
the
not.
First day
Maybe that's just the first week or the first day. There's a whole lot more in there.
Right.
And so
So what we're recovering now is we're to the point where God has told the nation of Israel at least twice, more like 200 times. Repent, turn back, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And we're now at a point where the bad things are going to happen. Right, that there's been so much turning away. We're on to the discipline part. Yeah. So we see that happening. I think in 11 through 13, and then in the last chapter 14 is kind of the cool part.
Finally, the restoration.
Yeah, it is a restoration.
Yeah.
And we actually see something happen very similar, I think, in Obadiah too, where bad things are going to happen, but there is a restoration at the end. So in chapter 11, I think it's kind of cool that there's a good example in there of God treating us, being humanity, different at different points in time. And God even says, hey, I think of you as a young son or a young man. And this is to the nation of Israel that he's talking to. And you're like, it's a couple thousand years old by this point. How can that be? But that's the way that's his thinking. Or God's thinking. And he knows that discipline has to happen, so how do you discipline a young man versus a child versus somebody older? Yeah. I mean, so there's going to be some discipline that happens, but he doesn't want to break the spirit.
Yeah.
He knows that there's also a restoration in there, but in chapter 11 he says, my people are obsessed with turning away from me. And that's the way he sees it.
Yep.
And he's not wrong.
It's interesting. So that's verse 7. In verses 8 and 9, it almost seems or feels like he switches gear, almost like he's really wishy-washy.
Yeah.
He says, how can I give you up? How can I surrender you? How can I, treat you like, some of these other places? And then the next says, I've had a change of heart. And all my tender compassions are aroused. I can't carry out my fierce anger. I cannot. Here's the key, I think, that ties it together. I cannot totally destroy Ephraim because I am God and not man.
Yeah.
Because the Holy One is among you, I will not come in wrath. And so, but hold on a second. God said he has to punish them. Yes, but if he were anybody else, he'd wipe them out. He'd annihilate them.
Right.
And so what looks to be this
wishy-washy. I'm going back on what I said I was going to do.
In God, it's actually him being faithful to his covenant promises. Because if he had no covenant with Israel, they wouldn't have existed this long, much less as long, into today.
Right. So there's a lot of words that we've talked about. Ephraim, Israel, Judah. Edom comes up next, right?
Edom comes up in
Obadiah.
yeah.
So we'll talk about that then.
Yeah.
I don't know that we need to hit those again, but they all show
they keep
up
showing
again.
up. Yeah.
And we have the northern and the southern kingdoms.
Well, and Hosea was primarily, he worked in the southern kingdom, but a lot of his prophecy was toward the northern kingdom, and the northern kingdom was what was taken first, and so it was a little bit more urgent that they repent because their timeline was faster.
Right. Right. In chapter, I'll skip to 13.
Yeah.
Basically, Ephraim is going to be destroyed because they were Baal worshiping.
Mm-hmm.
Things like Israel will be fed to the wild animals, and then he talks about Israel's kings. What about the kings? And God says, "Look, I granted you a king." Not in other places, you wanted a king, so I let you have one.
Yeah.
But, I granted you one. Where is he now?
Yeah. Well, and there's even a point where he said, "I punished you with a king."
Yeah, right.
You didn't even.
Right.
I mean, I told you what was going to happen if you had a human king.
Yep.
The bad stuff, and you're like, "Yes, but." It's like, okay. I think I mentioned last week this phrase about calf kissers.
Oh yeah,
it's in chapter 13. Verse 2, those who sacrifice to the calf idol are calf kissers. Got to be careful how you say that.
Yeah. So that's Baal, right?
No, actually,
different guy?
Jeroboam II, the king of Israel, who Hosea was prophesying during his time, Jeroboam II actually built another golden calf, just like back in Sinai, and placed that up there and had people worship it. It's like, I mean, it wasn't even just something similar. We're talking the same thing that they did back then.
So literally, probably kissing the calf.
Probably kissing the calf, yeah. Right. Yes.
So even Samaria is going to be held guilty in 13. So we have all this bad things that we know are going to happen.
Yep.
And then we get into 14, which is a little bit about the restoration or a call to return.
And just a point, Samaria, you said even Samaria is going to be, Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom. So that's where the calf was. That's where the worship center of this. Because,
so not even.
So it's not even, it's not even just even. I mean, it's like you got Jerusalem in the south and Samaria, the town, not just the region. Yeah. Yeah, that's where this calf was. Yeah. And then we get to chapter 14.
Yeah, which is awesome. I picked a verse out, for the ways of the Lord are right. The godly walk in them, but in them the rebellious stumble.
Yeah.
And the first thing I went to was Jesus being the cornerstone too, where we've talked a number of times in the New Testament. Jesus comes, he proclaims to Israel who he is. He is the cornerstone, but it seems like that cornerstone's raised up a little bit because the nation of Israel stumble over him and tripping over him. And it's interesting, they're the same vision as... Yeah.
So that's the last half of verse 9, which is the last verse of the book. I wanted to point out the first half of that verse because it's really cool. Who is wise? Let him discern these things. Who is discerning? Let him understand them, for the ways of the Lord are right. And it made me think of, after all of these promises of destruction and punishment and discipline and everything, why would God still offer restoration? Why not just offer, but why does he promise restoration? It really, from a geopolitical standpoint, it seems stupid and sort of confounding. And the very last verse says, let the wise person discern these things. And it made me think of the benediction in Romans chapter 11. Because Romans 9, 10, and 11 are talking about God dealing with Israel. And so the end of 11 sort of matches the end of Hosea, because at the end of chapter 11 of Romans, starting in verse 33, oh, the depth of the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and how unfathomable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has first given to God that God needs to repay him? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. How could we possibly understand a living, breathing nation of Israel today, given all of the stuff that we've seen in here?
Right.
Only God.
Right.
And how does that make sense? Only inside God.
Yeah, right. We get a little bit of it, like you said, in those earlier verses where he seems wishy-washy.
Yeah.
Because he's like, man, my love for you is so big. It's, basically clouding my judgment. I don't know.
Yeah, we got to be careful.
But he's trying to, well, I can only put it in my terms,
yeah.
Right? Or our terms as a human.
Paul said, there's a verse in 2 Timothy that's taken out of context a lot, that says, even if we are faithless, God is still faithful, right? Even if we're unfaithful, God is still faithful, because he has to be faithful to himself.
Yeah.
And so if God said, I won't do this, he can't do it. Even if everything else says he should, human logic and whatever. Why does Israel exist? Only because, not because God is necessarily just faithful to Israel, but because he's faithful to himself.
And he said it was going to.
And he said he was going to, yeah.
All right, great.
Yeah.
All right, so is that good for Hosea, you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So we skip Amos in the text, and we find, I almost passed it, Obadiah.
Yeah.
I've got a 2-page spread here, so there's
Obadiah.
Obadiah.
Well, it's one of those, you might want to look up the page number. Right, so like you said, we don't know much about Obadiah.
Mm-mm.
So what's the name Obadiah mean?
It means servant of Yah, actually. The Y-A-H or the I-A-H at the end is a shortened version of Jehovah. Jehovah is Yah.
Okay.
And Eved, the Hebrew word Eved is servant. So Obadiah is just servant of Jehovah, servant of God.
Okay.
That's it. That's all we know.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily even know if it's a proper name or if it's just a prophet who is a servant of Jehovah.
Yeah, like it could be a title.
Yeah.
Now, one of the
Probably
things
not,
one of the things that leads us to think that it could be his name is that there are several people in the Old Testament who are actually named Obadiah.
Yeah, which we don't know if it's one of those.
Could be.
Also, most of the prophets have son of, and there's
Yep.
not a son of in there. So
there's no family history.
Yeah.
There's not even really a time frame given. The only other of the prophets that is like that is Malachi, and it means Malachi, or Malachi means messenger, and then the I at the end is possessive. It's my. Yeah. So Malachi is actually my messenger. So again, is that his name? Is that his title? Malachi has the messenger, I'm going to send my messenger before you to prepare the way of the Lord.
Right.
So is it a play off of his that whole thing. But Obadiah and Malachi are the only two like that. So it's really hard to tell.
Okay. I see 3 sections in here.
Mm-hmm.
The first section, it talks about Edom. And it says Edom is going to be destroyed. Mm-hmm. And so, we certainly need to be cognizant of that. And then the first question is, who's Edom? Right. So who's Edom?
Edom is one of the nicknames for Esau, Jacob's brother.
Right.
And Edom is actually the word that means red. Right. So we say that Esau was probably red-haired or red-faced, something red-faced, something. So what that means is that the Edomites are cousins to the Israelites because Edom and Esau and Jacob are brothers, so they're descendants. This is family. So today, the land of Edom would be called, is what today we call Jordan.
Okay. The
nation of Jordan on the other side of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Right. That is the land that we're talking about here.
Okay. Okay. So, and then also in this first section, God goes to great lengths to say how utterly destroyed they will be.
They're not just going to be regularly destroyed. They're going to be thoroughly destroyed.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think, point made, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to be annihilated, taken off this earth.
Well, here's why. And that gets us into the...
right.
The second section.
Right. So of course, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I didn't want to...
Yeah.
Because, and he uses the term your relatives throughout here. And that's why, because literally they're cousins, basically.
Yeah. So it even goes back to the story in the womb, right?
Yeah.
They came out about the same time with.
Jacob is holding on to Esau's foot or ankle, or whatever.
Ankle,
His head,
right.
his heel,
Right. And then the whole birthright and giving it up. All that goes
So
on.
if you're interested, just a little bit of history, if you're interested, go back to Genesis chapters 25 and 27. Okay, 25 and 27 give you the story of the struggle between Esau and
these
Jacob.
two. Yeah. So actually, they not that they became different nations, but they're relatives. They're in different parts of Israel.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. So Isaac's two sons, so Abraham and Isaac. Then Isaac's two sons are Jacob and Esau.
Right. So God says treachery against Judah, your relatives.
Yeah.
So what's the treachery part?
Well, so Edom. So Israel's under attack a lot, right? So does Edom come over and help them? No, of course not. Why would they do that?
Actually, worse than that.
Yeah, what they do is they actually, they're snitches, is what they do. They tattletale to either Assyria or Egypt, whoever happens to be the power at the time, whoever thinks they can ingratiate themselves with. And it's like they're tattling on their brother, their cousin. It's like, oh, they didn't pay they didn't do this, they didn't do this, so that Israel gets attacked. And then, so not only do they not help them, not only do they snitch on them, they actually help attack. They side with these pagan nations to attack their relatives, Israel.
Right. So that's the reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're gonna be wiped out. And then God even says, by the same people that you sided with.
Yep.
So Israel and Assyria, right?
Yeah, Egypt and Assyria. Egypt and Assyria.
Right. So has this happened? This wiping out as we move into the third section.
Yeah. Ultimately, they finally were around AD 70, early first century. There was really not Edomites anymore. They'd already been assimilated a little bit into some of these other things. Fun fact is that King Herod of Jesus' day was an Edomite. He wasn't a Jew. He was actually from this family. And so you've got, he had some kids and, whatever. But, yeah, Edom, ultimately, there's no family of Esau, as far as we know, that's left anymore. And ultimately, in the coming day of the Lord, in the kingdom, there will be no Edom. No, even if there's anybody today that has a drop of Esau's blood,
not going to happen.
They're not going to be in there yet.
Right. So the last section talks about the day of the Lord, which we always interpret as a forward event that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Where Jesus is coming back as Messiah.
Yeah. There are little days of the Lord that have happened in the past. Wrath and restoration, judgment, blessing. Yeah. But that's the big one. Yeah.
And then that, of course, is then the 1,000-year reign too.
Yeah.
And then as part of that reign, where Jesus is standing on the mountain and the Messiah and taking the full leadership role.
Yeah, and we know that that's the one that's being talked about here because it refers to Mount Zion, which is a big clue that it's talking about that. But then the very last line of the little book here, then the Lord will reign as king.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty sure that's, Mount Edom, Mount Seir, Seir. As you're reading through the Old Testament, Mount Seir is like the high point in Edom. So whenever the Isaiah talks about this a lot, whenever you talk about the Edomites, or Mount Seir, that's all talking about that.
So just area. Like if you said Jerusalem, you may be talking about the nation of Israel.
Right. So when he talks about the going to go rule on Esau's mountain, there really is a mountain there in the ancient land of Edom called Mount Seir.
Nice. All right.
So that brings us to the end of our quick 4-week survey of 3 Old Testament books. I hope that you've found this at least interesting, encouraging that God is faithful to His word, that Israel still exists, and will continue to exist. And each one of these, don't miss this fact. Each one of these 3 prophets has punishment, but also at the end, Israel does come out as the winner only because of Jesus as king.
Right.
In the future.
Yeah.
So
Pretty cool.
yeah, the end of each of those books is pretty cool.
Right.
So, all right. Well, that finishes this series. We'll be back next time with a new series, and we're not going to tell you what that is. So you have to come back and find out. So as always, share these with people that you think would find them helpful in their own study, their own growth as they walk the path, and even Old Testament books like this can help us know God better and love Him more today. See you next time.
Bye.